Afternoon, everyone. I hope you have thoroughly enjoyed the morning sessions as well as I don't even know which words to use for her, dynamic, empowering, all those great words for our keynote, Ms. Kathy Boswell. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. I hope you were able to get that in as well. So at this time, I want to now share that I will be the moderator for this session. And again, thank you so much for joining it. This session titled Grassroots Advocacy, Using Our Collective Voice, Students and Alabama Can Achieve More, is focused on the conference theme of policy, advocacy, and collective impact. Our presenters here today are Alexi Bolton, and I think we have Liz Craig with us. And so we're excited to have them from Higher Education Partnership of Alabama. Feel free to read their bios. They're on the platform for you to see. We will have time for Q&A at the very end. And so please feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat along the way while they're presenting. And also remember, before we exit today, I will put a link in the chat for you to take a very brief survey about today's session. So now, without delay, I am going to turn it over to Alexi Bolton.
Thank you, Chandra. It is such a joy, a pleasure, an honor to be here with Alabama Possible. We at the Higher Education Partnership are so passionate about the work and grateful for the work y'all do. I'm going to share my screen and I'll introduce myself while I get things moving, but I would love to know all of you who are in the room. So if you are nearby a computer and would just introduce yourself in the chat, I'd love to know kind of who you are, where you're from, what your role is, and if there's anything specific you wanted to learn in this session, I'll be sure to try and keep that in mind. Thank you, Lori. Great to see you. I'm going to go ahead and put up this presentation. Hopefully it won't take me down, but thanks again for being here. Well, we were in screen share. There we go. So a little welcome from us at the Higher Education Partnership. Again, I'm Alexi Bolton. I'm our Director of Communications and Policy here at the partnership. And we are the advocacy organization for Alabama's 14 public universities. We represent primarily four-year and bachelor's degree granting universities. This is, you know, you heard from Alabama Community College System this morning, and also from AIC. We tend to be more on the policy and advocacy side of that spectrum. And we're excited to be here today. We're going to talk a little bit about how we engage our grassroots audiences in policy and advocacy. We're going to do the same process we do with our college students. So we're going to learn, we're going to engage, and we're going to advocate. I hope that all of you will be hands-on and go with me as we pass through this adventure. There's a little overview of the day. I want to start, though, by saying that our passion here at the partnership is really centered around organizing student voices. When the partnership was formed in 1997, it was a group of presidents and lobbyists who came together to say, hey, we need to have a voice in the legislative process. And what that has looked like has been organizing students, faculty, staff, alumni, and advocates each year. So actually this week on Thursday, we have our annual Higher Ed Day event. We'll have about 1,000 advocates here in Montgomery speaking on behalf of the universities. But throughout the year, we also do training with the students. And I'm taking a sampling of that training today and kind of expanding it for you all as our adult audience. But hopefully these are some tools and some strategies and resources that you'll be able to apply for your students. I saw in the chat that many of you work directly with high school students. And so I hope that these strategies will be age appropriate and easy for you all to use as well. I do want to mention my colleague Liz Craig is here, and she does community partnerships and civic engagement. So if you're in the communities, there's anything that she can do to help, we would be happy to connect with you all further. You can find her in the chat, or I'll share contact information at the end. And it paused on me. There we go. So a question for you all. If you don't mind, you can unmute your mic or drop in the chat, but I like to warm up with a little question. I'd love to know, what do you think advocacy is? I can't actually see the chat, so there we go. I got it. Speaking up for others. I love it. Anyone else? Empowering communities. Absolutely. Anything before I move on? What is public policy? We asked college students this and they didn't have an answer at all. So public policy, laws, policies, procedures that we make to serve the people. I often ask students, why do we make laws? And on the flip side, why do we advocate for issues at all? Because we have to know why we're engaging in this. And how do these laws get made? Where do they come from? So there's a few ways laws get made. Sometimes, as you all know, they drop down from federal government. Sometimes they come from think tanks, from idea generators, from political action groups. But a lot of times they come from people like yourself. And so we work at the Alabama State House every day, and I cannot count the number of times legislators have said, hey, so-and-so in my district, my buddy who I do X, Y, and Z with, he's having this problem. So we're going to make a policy to address that. Which brings me to the question, what is grassroots advocacy? And how is it different from advocacy? Any thoughts? Okay, it's a little quiet. It's a hard term to kind of grasp our head around, wrap our head around, because in some ways, all advocacy that we participate in is grassroots advocacy. But in a lot of ways, there's countless avenues for advocacy. Maybe you have participated in a phone calling campaign and left a voicemail or written an email to your legislator's office. Maybe you have been a member of a group and you support that group financially and they donate money. Or maybe if you're with a K-12 school, you're a member of a group like AEA, which is an advocacy group specifically in Montgomery that does what I would call governmental affairs. So they have a staff member that does that. Grassroots advocacy in my world, how I talk about it, is conversational advocacy. That's when you're in the community and maybe you're not lobbying an elected official, but you're trying to change the narrative. So I think it really goes to the heart of what this conference is about. How do we change the narrative in our communities? Exactly like the keynote speaker was just sharing, how do we change what that conversation is? And so for me, that's kind of the heart of grassroots advocacy. Thank you all for participating in this exercise. So what I'm going to do moving forward, we're going to do a little bit of a workshop, hands-on style. I'm going to walk through learn, engage, advocate. So because you all kindly let me lead this, we're going to work off of the resource guide the partnership puts out every year. We share this with our students to kind of inform them of issues in Alabama and make sure that they're making educated and nuanced pieces of their conversation. So we like sharing this data. If you want to follow along, you can scan that QR code, or you may be able to scan this and put it in your chat. I'm not sure. Liz, if you could put the resource guide in the chat, I'd appreciate that. So the first thing we like to talk about is the state of the state. Alabama Possible does a ton of work around this, but we think it's important to mention that Alabama has the 7th highest poverty rate in the nation. We lag behind even a lot of the southern region. And while we're seeing revenues and businesses increase, it's still key for us to note to our students, hey, you know, this is a problem that's affecting not only the state, but kind of you all as well. And further, the average earnings of Alabamians, they lag behind when you look at the per capita income, most of the rest of the US, which you can kind of tell in that poverty rate. But it's always interesting to look at how they're associated with college and degree programs, credentialing programs. So we like to point this out to our students. We move on to talk about educational attainment. So looking here, you kind of can see where Alabama lags behind in our percentage of the population with degrees. So the average across the nation is that 33% of adults have a bachelor's degree. In Alabama, we are about 6 points behind that, at only 26% of our adult workforce has a bachelor's degree. So if I flip back one more slide, you can see that discrepancy in income certainly has an effect on Alabama's overall possibility and positioning in the state. I'll move on, talk about projected growth, the job openings for college students. I'm sure many of you are aware of that. And then for us, we work on a lot of funding issues. So we want to show you that higher education funding and education funding overall lags behind in Alabama most of the rest of the US. You can see we're down here at about $7,000 per student. These are higher ed numbers, but we're at about $7,000 per student. You can see we're not matching even our neighboring states. And so what does that mean? That's a lot of data. What does it mean to our students? Why should they care? Well, we know that it's incredibly expensive for students to attend college. It's 46% of the average family's income. We also know that the state allocations are directly connected to how much of that cost is pushed to students and families. So for us, this data tells a really strong story about the possibilities and the accessibility of a university degree. We're looking at it even in the two-year schools. We know that two-year schools are often a more accessible pathway for a lot of students, and the state is still, as of 2021, funding two-year students at a higher level per student than four-year students. So if you look at that cost share, that pushes the percentage to families looking for a four-year degree at a higher rate. So that brings us to our challenge for today. I flew through that data. I'll take a pause here for a second. If you have any questions or comments about that, I'd love to talk more, love to hear it. But for today, I want to talk about this challenge. And if we are going to advocate on an issue, what partnership would do, only 26% of Alabama's population has a college degree, well below the national average of 33%. So kind of save that in your brain. And we're going to move along, we're going to engage with this issue, and we're going to tackle it from a few different strategies. I'm going to introduce you today to a story-based strategy, as well as a brainstorming strategy that we call How Might We? We borrowed How Might We from the Stanford Design School, and story-based strategy is an independent strategy for advocacy. I'll share resources to both at the end. And if you're already familiar with one of these, please feel free to jump in and add. I'd love to hear from y'all's expertise as well. So I'm back to the challenge. 26% of Alabama's population has a college degree, which is nearly 6% below the national average. What are we going to do about it? And what are we as advocates going to do to change the narrative? So we take this challenge. We want to first ask ourselves to engage with the issue. What do we hope to accomplish? Well, for me, I hope to increase the number of students attending college after their high school graduation. Who am I addressing? In what format? So we've got a few options here. Am I going to be talking directly to high school students? Am I talking to, like many of you, high school counselors or career coaches? Or am I going to talk to the legislature? I think those are three different approaches. So kind of looking at that. And then what are your strengths? I'll tell you, my strengths are not in dramatic storytelling. My strengths are most certainly in data, in talking about numbers, and certainly not, despite many, many years of theater in that arena. And then how long do I have to prepare? Is this something that I need to do on the fly? Am I going to have to be prepared to elevator pitch it? Do I have a full day? Do I have multiple workshop sessions? Can you work with your students over and over and over and help them advocate for themselves? All things to consider. So these two strategies kind of hit both ends of those spectrums. The first, I'll start with, how might we? This strategy, in my opinion, is best for taking a challenge that you recognize is out there, but you don't quite have a solution in mind. It's a great opportunity to brainstorm, build solutions, but also to build a community coalition around this. As people brainstorm with you, they build their buy-in, they build their willingness to help you. You build longer-term partnerships, and you can develop and propose new solutions using this. Having that buy-in, having that development, it's a great tool for when you're sitting down with a group of students or a group of legislators and want to work together on a solution. So what do we do here? We take the challenge and we ask ourselves, what are the contributing elements of this challenge? So if you all would, on a paper, in the chat, wherever you feel comfortable, if you can get to the part where you can type it in, I think Zoom has that tool. I don't know how to do it, but type it in here. What are the contributing elements? Why is it that Alabama's population lags so far behind in college degrees? Y'all are with students every day. I'm sure many of you have some thoughts. You can use the data we just saw, use your own experiences or the experiences of your students. Love to know what challenges y'all see here. I'll put mine in the chat first. Price, not aware what's available to them. I think I can type it. Exposure to college isn't introduced early enough. Absolutely. Cost and access. By access, do you mean access to resources, or do you just mean kind of physical locations of the universities? Students believing they're not college material. Access to resources, physical location, absolutely, because the universities are kind of stratified across counties. Students not believing they're college material. Yeah, absolutely. Where are they hearing that narrative, and how do we change that? I agree. So you'll take that challenge and ask why it's not existing. So is it public perception? That would be, to me, the college material. We hear a lot, we'll make presentations across the state and people will say, well, I don't think college degrees are important anymore, because I heard this morning somebody say, because the workforce isn't requiring people to have college degrees. That's all changed. So no one needs a college degree. Public perception, lack of resources, opportunity. Absolutely. We just talked about funding. So we're going to use those. Stick with me. And we're going to create some how might we questions. We're going to fill in the blank here. How might we fill in affect, change the experience, affect the experience so that we can achieve a result, a desired result. So if I were looking at funding as the problem, I might say, how might we increase access to funding so that high school students applying to college can have a more easily accessible route to their degree? I've asked this question now and I've left it open-ended. So if I'm an advocate, what does that get me, right? And the answer may be that this is a starting point. But the goal with the how might we question would be maybe not to come up with a specific suggestion, but to begin changing that narrative, to begin having those conversations with your community to say, I see that this is a challenge. How can we correct it? And how can I get you to help me correct it? What can we do together? So if you're taking a group of students to the State House, say you want to come and you want to do grassroots political advocacy, you've trained your students, they know exactly what they're coming to talk about. This might not be the best strategy for them. But if you have a group of students who you think is well prepared to talk about the challenges, to discuss the nuance of their situation, to think critically and to work together, this might be a great opportunity to sit down with some community colleagues, sit down with your local legislative delegation and say, hey, these are the challenges we're facing. How might we change the situation around these challenges so that more students in our district can pursue a post-secondary credential or a college degree? Ultimately, how might we change the narrative around this conversation so that more of our students look to a path after high school? And that's kind of the route here. It's pretty easy, pretty straightforward for brainstorming. Any questions, any comments before I move on about how this feels? This feels like any more information I can provide? Can I move on? Okay, then I'm gonna cruise on. Secondly, story-based strategy, which I would say is best for a limited time frame. This is great for when you have specific predetermined goals. So maybe you've worked with Alabama Possible or a larger group and you say, my specific goal is that I want more college scholarships, or I want to look at changing the narrative that quote unquote college isn't for everyone. I want every single student to know that a post-secondary route is an option for them. So what can I do to change that? So we're looking at a kind of analysis here. What's the existing story? What's being told to students? How are they receiving this message? Are they receiving it at home? Are they receiving it through their community members? Is this what they're hearing on the news? What underlying assumptions are present? Are those true? Are they not true? Are they true for some people and not true for you? Can those be manipulated or kind of altered to fit within a format and a frame that makes sense to you, even if you disagree with them? Why is this existing story causing conflict? For me, why is the story that not every child needs a college degree causing conflict? Is it because that story is actively changing the narrative? Or is it a deeper issue and something else that I'm worried about? And further, how does your audience perceive the issue? I'd say a lot of our audience is comfortable with the issue. Disruption is kind of not comfortable, not something they're looking for. This is the narrative that we're attached to. So we move on. We've got to craft our story. And story-based strategy, I think, is great, especially in student settings, because it allows students to tell their own story, and it allows them to identify elements that they're familiar with, possibly from literature classes or movies or video games. It's something they can really relate to and understand, that they're telling a conflict. They're looking at the characters, they're looking at imagery and foreshadowing. They understand those terms, especially in the high school, middle school, high school range. And it's something they can build on and something they can use not only for advocacy, but also for other persuasive elements. So I would do this way. And rather than kind of jump in, though I'm happy to answer any questions, I'll tell a story of my own. And that is that I am a social worker by education. So I did my first practicum. As a social worker, you do 2 practicum settings. I did my first practicum in a rural area outside of Tuscaloosa, one of the lowest income areas in the state. And I worked with students from kindergarten to 12th grade, as I'm sure many of you have quite a wide range. And my role was to be the behavioral health intern. I worked with a school counselor who had 600 kids and no help. She was all on her own. And so I did intake for her. I filled out screening forms. I looked for red flags at home, and I most importantly to me, had the opportunity to sit down with students one-on-one and say, what do you want to do when you grow up? What's the dream? What's the goal? And for me, it's really interesting that the kindergartners, second graders, the third graders had big dreams, right? They were all really excited about the possibilities. They wanted to own a store because they had seen one downtown and they liked what was sold there. Or they saw a superstar on TV and they were going to be a musician or an actor or a firefighter, you know, the feeling. But by the time I got to my high schoolers and they were 9th, 10th, 11th graders, more and more of them told me, I don't have a thing I want to do. I don't even know if I'm going to finish high school. I had one kid, I will call him Connor, and Connor would come into my office every week, possibly because I gave them all candy, but had to recruit them somehow. Connor came into the office every week and he was skipping class. I finally found out he was skipping class. One of his teachers came and I was like, man, why are you skipping class? What are you doing? And he was like, I turn 16 in 3 months. When I turn 16, I never have to come back here. And I was like, dude, that's not a good idea. Like, we got to back up. Let's slow our horses. What are you saying? Like, you've got to come back. You're doing fine in your classes. You just got to go to him. He was like, it doesn't matter what I do. I am not doing anything after this. So I don't need this degree. I don't need to finish high school because after this, it's over for me, just like it has been for all my family. I don't know anybody who's done anything, and I'm going to do exactly what they did. And is that fine? Sure. But for me, as a school social worker, the idea that for this 15-year-old kid, he had no hope for what his future would look like. He had lost his ambition for what it could be. And that was affecting all of his life decisions. And for me, looking at red flags, looking at data down the road, I knew that that would affect his long-term income potential, his long-term job stability, and his ability to take care of and provide for his family, which is not to say that he wouldn't have been able to do that, but certainly a barrier. So for me, this idea that college isn't for everyone brings to mind Connor. It brings to mind a student doing well in his classes, but sitting slumped over and telling me there's no future after high school. And when we talk about changing this narrative and readjusting how we approach post-secondary access and college career pathways, workforce pathways, the dream for me is to make sure that every single Connor has a vision of the future, that every single kid, Joe, Sally, Alexi, Liz, can see themselves in a career and a job that's fulfilling and stable and makes them happy. And larger than that, it's that Alabama can reach the 22nd century economy and the economy of the future. So we choose our delivery. I told that to you personally, but maybe you prefer social media. Maybe your students prefer social media. Maybe they prefer to use direct communication, or maybe they'd rather write a letter. You have options. You get to see what would make the most impact. We often encourage our students to tell their stories in person at an event. We say, show, don't tell. Find the emotion, unlock that heart, and make it memorable. Tell something that people can hang on to. We also encourage our students to bring a one-pager, bring some notes about their approach that they can leave behind. And to change the narrative, we then say, what is advocacy? So some tools for advocacy as I move through, you connect with larger advocacy groups. Y'all have already done that, being connected with Alabama Possible. They're a great resource to connect you to these events. Attend advocacy days and local events. We find lots of people who really want to come to the State House, but when we invite them out to talk to their legislators in their hometown, it's just not quite as exciting. So make sure you're attending those local events and building the relationships naturally. Connect with your elected officials online in person, leave a positive impression. So we try not to go in and tell them they're doing things wrong. We try to go in and encourage them and leave an offer to help for the future. Provide solutions instead of more problems. And finally, change the narrative in your community. For some of our students, it connects really well to say, you know, if you want people to come to church with you, you're not going to go out and kind of send a letter, but you may talk to your best friend and say, I've saved a seat next to me. And that's kind of a model that you can apply to, I think, all advocacy. As you look to change the narrative, as you look to tell these stories or ask these questions, that grassroots, ground up voice, bridging together multiple voices, building upon the voice, your own voice, and changing the story when you hear it from your colleagues, when you hear it from your community leaders, approaching them and say, hey, I heard what you said, but that sounds like a challenge to me, and let's look at a solution. And I think that changing the narrative in your community is really how we begin to change policy. That's how our policymakers, instead of coming to Montgomery and saying, well, I heard that we need no more funding for education because we need more roads, they come and they say, hey, we've got to get scholarships for kids because I heard this from my colleagues in my community. Some resources if you'd like to connect with us. higheredpartners.org/subscribe. We send out weekly newsletters during the legislative session about higher ed policy related issues. So there's my shameless plug for us. And then you can access sort of a worksheet on story-based strategy that's geared for students at this link. And the design school at Stanford has a fun little activity on how might we questions here. I'll be happy to drop those in the chat as well. There's my contact, abolton@higheredpartners.org. I'm on LinkedIn, and we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all the other things. I'd love to connect with y'all and answer any questions. I think I am right under time, Chandra. So
you rock that. You are definitely under time, and we have plenty of time for questions or discussions that others would like to hear more about. So feel free to come off mute if you like, or if you're a little shy and you want to put your question in the chat, feel free to do that, and we can address those questions now. And so while you're doing that, I want to personally like to thank you for sharing such great information and being able to guide us through this. So now, if there are any questions, we have one from Keela Lawrence. Hello, Keela.
Hi. Hi, Lexi. Hi, Liz. And also hi, Chandra. Thanks so much for the great session. I really appreciated it. So I just have a question more so about like gleaning the most important information from students and then also kind of empowering them, because I think sometimes for students, it can be really hard to encourage them to tell their story, or they might have these like lingering feelings, not to get all deep, but of like shame or different things like that. So I'm wondering the best way to empower the students to tell their story and like use it as more of just showing like a valiant effort instead of like a lack of something.
That is a great question. I'm going to start at the end, if that's all right, and move backwards. I appreciate especially the way you worded a valiant effort instead of a lack of something. I think the strengths-based perspective sometimes gets lost in advocacy movement. So I really appreciate that. I think sometimes we go in and we say, here are all the problems. But I think the strengths-based perspective is equally important. So for students, maybe like myself, I am so grateful to have had a scholarship to go to college, and it was a pretty thorough scholarship. I'm so grateful for that opportunity and for the work that went into that. So I think for instructors and advocates to empower me to say, hey, there are good things here too, and here's where I have succeeded, and I want this for everybody else, or yes, and kind of conversation that this is a strength, and I think it can be better if you did X, Y, Z. For students who may feel that shame, I think first building a safe space of conversation, whether it's just one-on-one with you and allowing them to be comfortable sharing their story with you, and maybe you anonymize it and you say, I'm happy to speak on your behalf if you'll come stand with me. And we'll say, we'll say this is another student, a random student, a friend of ours, but you're still here and you still are affirming that this is a real experience, even if it happened to another person. It didn't happen to you, it happened to another person. And secondly, just to allow them to share kind of generalized statements. I think that learn piece can be really helpful if you help them understand kind of the general perspective and connect that, while they can connect it to their own life, also just to the experience of their community and of the world around them, and say, even if it's not a concern for me, it's a concern for someone, and I, a 16-year-old, am concerned for that someone, so let's work together on helping them. I hope that answered the question. Those are my thoughts, but I'm open to any other opinions as well.
No, I definitely appreciate the anonymous piece. That is not something I even thought about. And like, it allows them to own their story, but also not have it kind of as a labeling piece for them. Right.
And I think too, it's really, for a lot of students that I've seen, empowering for them to know that they're standing up for more than just themselves, that this is a common thing, that they're standing up for for other people. And you can stand up for people even if you aren't part of that community. You can be an ally. You can be someone who wants to just advocate. My boss has an acronym that he has shared on occasion. I'm sorry he's not able to be here with us today at Higher Ed Day. Really just got schedules kind of in a blur, but he sometimes says that lobby stands for let others be heard, silent H, because of you. And so the idea that you're here on behalf of someone else, that you're here advocating because you're using your voice to amplify a story, has been really powerful for me and for a lot of our students.
I absolutely love that acronym. Love it. Any other questions for Lexi?
Well, like I said, thank you for being here. I'll put my email on my phone in the chat in case something comes up later. We'll be happy to share any more information. We'd love to stay connected with y'all and to provide any additional resources. Chandra and her team do a great job, but we'd love to provide any additional resources that we have, and to certainly represent the voices of your students as they move into their post-secondary plan. And please let us know if there's anything we can do for you and your communities.
Yes, so please put your information in the chat so they can grab that. And also, I'm hoping everyone was able to get that QR code to go through the resources that they provide. They are rich, they are great, and so make sure you take advantage of that. We will be able to share those out after the conference as well. So don't fret if you miss it and you lose the link today. You'll get it later when we do our follow-up email. Before you exit today, be sure to click on the link I just placed in the chat. That's a 2-question survey. Ask that you complete it before you exit. Yes, Keila, I have to say, yes, thank you so much, Alexi. I have taken many notes. That's the hard part of being a moderator. You find yourself in learning mode as well. And so you're trying to balance both acts. And so, but I thank you so much for providing so much great information on advocacy and how to better support that work and in that space in a more authentic way and be able to use student voices in a safe way. And so again, I hope everyone enjoyed this session as much as I did. And so now you get a little breather before our next session. And we will see you in the next session, which starts at 1 o'clock. So I hope you guys enjoyed the session and see you soon.